Hello everyone, welcome again. The first thing we're going to start with is this little address where you can get this soundtrack for today at the end. It's scientificsounds.com/mind-waves. This address is where you can ask a question. I've been a little behind this last week. I haven't answered many of those questions because our business has been very busy this last week and a lot of things have been happening. I'm still dealing with the passing of my business manager, Betty Jane, so we're still dealing with a number of different things that take up a lot of our time. This is the address where you can see all of the previous live streams on my YouTube channel. That's https bit.ly Dr. Thompson Live. D, T, and L are capitalized. So this week we're going to be discussing the underlying deeper science behind what we are attempting to do with these live streams, with the idea of mind linking and brain entrainment, the idea of more than one person listening to headphones where the two headphones or more are plugged into the same sound source means that we create a synchronicity between brain waves, and then we can amplify that if we use a scientific form of brainwave entrainment, where we can actually entrain your brainwaves, and then we can entrain the brainwaves of two people to precisely the same place, or more people, depending on how many people have headphones on at the same time. So there is a general overall science behind why we would have a tendency for different people to align together in their brainwaves, even if you did not have binaural beats present, from the underlying principle of coupled oscillators and biological synchronization, where my body clocks are always trying to tie themselves to external world events, and we're supplying the most powerful external world event for your body to want to time itself to. Headphones, music, would cause a generalized synchronizing up. But when we use brainwave entrainment and binaural beats, we're really nailing it in a scientific way to really force the issue of a precise alignment of brain frequencies among large groups of people. And the history behind that is its sort of own kind of story, which I am here to tell you today, that story. So, and aligning with that story, coming up soon, next month in December, today is the 15th, so another 20 days I will put on another one of my biotuning workshops. This is where I train people to become practitioners in this technique that I've described a few times, using the heart rate variability and a laptop and a sound table and a bunch of different pieces of equipment, where I train people how to use that and make that their living. So that is what's happening on December 5th through the 19th. I teach another 5-day workshop, and it's on 3 different weekends. So the December 5th and 6th, that's a Saturday and a Sunday. That'll be my first workshop. So the 6th on Sunday, I will not be doing this broadcast. I'll be moving it again to the next day on a Monday. And I will post that on my Facebook and YouTube channel, just what dates those are. And then the next week, the 12th and the 13th, is another 2-day part of that workshop. And so the 13th will be the Sunday that I won't be here. I'll be the next day on Monday. And those 2 weekends are the ones that I will be moving this Sunday to a Monday instead. And like I said, I'll make sure everybody knows those dates. Meantime, the whole system of biotuning with the heart rate variability and certain frequencies that balance your nervous system is based on my personal belief that I've come up with over the years. I've been in practice for 40 years, and now I'm more convinced than ever that stress is the ultimate cause of disease. That my body's ability to be balanced and normal in its stress handling centers, which are part of the autonomic nervous system, which is composed of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which houses my fight or flight response and my relaxation digestion response. If that system is out of balance, then every system in the body that it controls, which is everybody, potentially has some problem. If master control has got a problem, every system it controls potentially has a problem. And as time marches on and it doesn't get fixed, the systems it controls get further and further and further out of balance, and we have symptoms that alert us. And the medical system tends to try to silence those symptoms with symptom management pills, but that doesn't fix the underlying condition, which continues to fester and get worse and worse until you truly do become a medical patient, which requires heroic interventions at that point. The underlying idea of this autonomic nervous system here, which has the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic, I covered this before, but it's always useful to do it again. So you can see that the sympathetic nervous system arises from the thoracic spine into the upper lumbars, and the nerve roots that come out go into this area called the sympathetic chain and into these postganglionic neurons, which are conglomeration of nerve bundles where they all come together and come out the other side to the organs. It's very different with the parasympathetic nervous system, which arises from cranial nerves. Like the 10th cranial nerve here is the vagus nerve. And this is the core and center of the parasympathetic nervous system, which arises from the brainstem and from the sacral plexus down here. So you can see the parasympathetic begins at the upper and the lower end of the spine, and the sympathetic comes from the middle. But the thing about the vagus nerve is it just comes straight out of the brainstem and goes straight to the organs. And the sympathetic goes through this sympathetic chain and these postganglionic neurons before it gets there. It's the difference between these two. The primary thing is that the vagus nerve here has direct access directly from the brain straight to the organs. And the sympathetic does not. It has to go through a supply chain first before it can get there. And that's because the parasympathetic nervous system here drives the system and controls the system. So essentially, when you have a fight or flight response, it's not so much that the sympathetic nervous system turns on, it's the parasympathetic turns itself off and the sympathetic turns on by default. And when you and now, you'll see more and more advertisements and research articles that are talking about the magnificence of stimulation of the vagus nerve as being a new 21st century therapy for all kinds of different diseases. It tends to be, it's the trending thing now, is stimulation of the vagus nerve, usually with some kind of electronic probe. But excuse me, I've been doing this now for 35 years with sound wave stimulation of the vagus nerve. And in reality, it's not even that. If you look inside the brain, the origin of the vagus nerve, of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, both arise here in this little zone called the hypothalamus. By the way, this green thing is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the center of the body clocks, which is the core and the origin of why brainwave entrainment works and why my body times itself to external world events to save energy. That's this zone. Here's the pituitary gland. Here's the pineal gland over here. So this area right here, if we blow that up, we can see that it comes out of here. It's made up of all these little tiny organelles here. Each one has a fancy schmancy name and a function. Here's the pituitary hanging down. And if we blow this area up again, we can see that it's formed of a number of different little organelles. And for instance, this one right here, this blue one, the anterior hypothalamic area, this right here is the origin of the parasympathetic nervous system. And here, the posterior area is the sympathetic nervous system. That's where these two have their absolute origin. And this area right here, the parasympathetic, the anterior hypothalamic area, is the area that we are resonating like a wine glass with a specific sound frequency accurate to a couple of decimal points in my technology called biotuning. And I'm monitoring the function of the parasympathetic nervous system with an advanced medical monitoring system called real-time heart rate variability that can show me the function of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic on my computer screen live. Here you can kind of see each one of these little organelles has a very specific function. Here we are again at the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the one that controls circadian rhythms. Here's the anterior nucleus, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. That's this one, this green one here. And then here, the posterior nucleus is the sympathetic nervous system, and that's this one right here. So I mentioned this before, how your story tends to unfold in interesting ways once you've begun to step on your path and these synchronicities begin to show up. And back in the days when I had my office and my clinical office and also my faculty office at the California Institute for Human Science, where I was on the faculty for 6 years, one day there's a knock on the door of my office, and there's a man there I've never seen before, some older guy, who was looking for me and had this device that had been kicking around his garage, that he was looking to give it to somebody who was doing brain science, and he had read about me, so he wanted to give me this system that I asked him what it was. He said, it's heart rate variability. What's that? He says it monitors the sympathetic, parasympathetic. I said, well, that's the major system that controls all systems, and you can see it on a computer screen. He said, yeah, how much do you want for it? Oh, I don't want anything for it. I'm just looking for somebody to give it to. And he gave this thing to me, and he walked away. And so that became the beginning for me of using heart rate variability to monitor the autonomic nervous system in the center of your brain that controls all your systems. And that eventually, as time went on, through a series of different kind of growth phases and discovery phases, became what it is today, with a very sophisticated semi-automated system in a laptop that shows that center of your brain live on a computer screen, so I can use that to tell me what sound frequencies work to heal you. Heart rate variability, by the way, is basically taking the electrical activity of the heartbeat, the boom, 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 and measuring the space between each heartbeat in microseconds. So each heartbeat has its own timing, and it turns out that the more variable, the more different each heartbeat is from the one next to it, the more healthy you are. Now, I would have thought it would have been the more perfect they are, the more perfectly aligned, but that's not the case. It's why it's called heart rate variability. The more variable space between each heartbeat, the more healthy you are. And the more metronome-like and the more exactly the same, the worse it is for you. As a matter of fact, that's why it's a gold standard in medicine for predicting heart attack, predicting disease, predicting mortality from deep disease processes in your body. It's just that heart attack is the biggest killer in the Western world, so it takes the lion's share of the research dollars and the attention. But heart rate variability is a good predictor of mortality in general from all kinds of different processes in your body. And the reason why this space between each heartbeat would begin to deteriorate is because the underlying control system of the sympathetic parasympathetic is supposed to be living in this state of homeostasis where sympathetic and parasympathetic are balanced at zero stress in my system, and all my energy comes back into my reservoir, and my body begins to constantly work on a never-ending maintenance list of 1,000 things to do to keep my body healthy and rebuilt, and cells being reborn to replace the ones that have just died, and things like that go on all the time. How my system balances my body chemistry and my meridians and the chi and all of that. All of that is balanced under the hood from this autonomic nervous system, which requires sympathetic parasympathetic to be in the state of balance. But if I feel I'm threatened, the sympathetic is going to turn on, mobilize my body's energies into my muscles to fight for my life, and abandon all these other processes. It's going to abandon the maintenance list. It's going to abandon digestion, elimination, my immune system, my higher brain centers. My brain will go into instinctive mode. And it's only supposed to last for a few minutes. I'm going to chase breakfast around and going to get it. Or I'm going to be running from something chasing me and I'll get away. And then it comes back to zero. If I then get breakfast and I cook it up and I eat it, now the parasympathetic is going to turn on, and the parasympathetic is going to mobilize my energies into my gut to digest my food, eliminate toxins, and then when that's done, it all comes back to zero again. Energy comes back to my reservoir, and I start working on my list. That's how it's supposed to be. This here is an example of the screen, my biotuning screen. Down here is the classic heart rate variability trace. And you have to remember all this is live. So that's the innovation for me. I had a company create a real-time heart rate variability for me and have that patented. Other heart rate variability systems tend to be a snapshot system that gathers over a few minutes and then crunches numbers. But this blue band is the sympathetic nervous system, green is parasympathetic, red is exotic factors of hormones, subconscious mind, and a bunch of other things. I'm looking at these two branches because I need them to be balanced. And balance looks like this right here at zero. Sympathetic, parasympathetic, zero. So when you lay down on your back, your body should go into maximum de-stress mode and push in the clutch. So it should do it within 3 minutes. So I should see a little bit of sympathetic tone because when you stand up, there's a stress response from blood dropping out of your head, and your body mobilizes itself to counteract that. And this should all collapse down to here in 3 minutes. When I first got the beta test for this system, I beta tested patients for 6 years with this, thousands of patient visits. And one thing that was surprising to me was that nobody seemed to have a normal response in the nervous system. Nobody, when they laid down on their back, had the sympathetic collapse down in 3 minutes to zero. Just about everyone had sympathetic just on all the time. And your body's not designed for that. That's not a good thing. That's a bad clinical finding. It means that you're running a fight-or-flight response all the time and burning up all your resources. And energy is continually and constantly pulled from your digestive tract and from your elimination system and from your immune system and from your higher brain centers. So none of those work properly. You can't digest your food properly. You can't eliminate toxins properly. Your immune system is compromised, and your memory and concentration is not the best on a continual basis. My innovation was to expose you to a series of sound frequencies until I could find a sound frequency accurate to a couple of decimal points that would make this happen. Somehow, and for some reason, a specific sound frequency that's different for each person sort of pushes the reset button in the autonomic nervous system and breaks this vicious cycle, this vicious stress cycle, breaks that and returns it to homeostasis. And then it's a matter of doing a series of treatments, putting it on a player so you can bring it home with headphones, and recalibrating your autonomic nervous system on a continual daily basis. That takes about 30 minutes a day, listening to the soundtrack, and every time you listen to the soundtrack, the clutch pushes in at your autonomic nervous system level, and every time it goes there, it gets stronger to be there. And we're essentially taking your autonomic nervous system to a gym and muscling up its ability to be at the zero stress, normal, balanced mode. Now, this process, let me just go back here, this process requires you to have these heart rate variability sensors attached to each wrist, and they connect through your heart. So one on this wrist and one on this wrist is connecting those two through my heart in order to get the reading. And that developed into what I started doing with couples therapy. So now we're going to have two people who are a couple holding hands. And as soon as we hold hands, we're maximizing the couple oscillator biological synchronization phenomenon through skin conduction, electrical skin conduction. So as soon as I touch you, our two nervous systems are now linked with an electromagnetic modem of our body electromagnetic fields. And we will see our heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, brain waves begin to synchronize over time just because you're connected. We can push that issue if we had the two of you having headphones on, listening to the same soundtrack, like we are all doing with these mind links as part of these live streams that I'm doing. So if the two people were listening to headphones, we could watch their brain waves on EEG start to synchronize up. And whatever the brain does, it orders the body to do. So the body follows the brain. So that means body processes would follow suit and synchronize up as well. However, in this case, we've got a couple holding hands, and we're going to release one hand, and we're going to attach the heart rate variability sensor on one wrist of the one person and on the other wrist of the other person. And now we've got three people holding hands, the two people plus the little computer. So the computer is now linked into this circle with one pad on one person's wrist and one pad on the other person's wrist, and it's spliced into the circle. And now we're going to fire up the heart rate variability monitor, and we're going to back here. We're going to fire up the monitor, and what we will see is this sympathetic stress response present, because we essentially have two people who know each other, but they're essentially a different biological DNA, and we're not related by blood. We're essentially strangers, and there's a stress level present between us that we are not even aware of. And in some cases, it's couples therapy because the couple is having trouble. So they are aware that there's barriers between them. We're trying to scientifically drop those barriers. So now that I can see the stress response on my computer screen, what's happening is I'm getting a readout of the entity of your relationship, because the wrist sensors have to now pass through two bodies before it gets to the other sensor. One wrist goes through two bodies and gets to the other sensor on the other side of two bodies. So it's really, the calculations are taking into account two different autonomic nervous systems, and the number crunching is coming up with the entity of my relationship, which only exists when the two of us are there together. So so now we can see the stress that is present, and I can do the same sound sweep that I do with an individual, except now I'm treating the entity of your relationship as an individual, and I'm doing the sound sweep that I normally do until I see this zero stress point arrive. And now I have a frequency that collapses the stress at an under the hood level between the two of you. And now I can take that sound and we can do couples therapy, because now you're both going to listen to this soundtrack together, and it's going to drop the barriers between the two of you. People ask me, how should we listen to this? Every day for 30 minutes, you listen to this together, and best with headphones, holding hands, listening to it together with headphones, so we really synchronize stuff up. And perhaps a really good way is maybe with no clothes on. But the one rule of the house is always that if a disagreement or an argument ever arises between the two of you, the first thing you have to do is put this soundtrack on in the background to resolve that issue, because the soundtrack will collapse the stress and put you into essence connection mode again, which is who you met when you first fell in love. Love sickness. Love sickness is when my ordinary personality falls away and my essence comes forward, the really, truly real part of me, the lovable part of me, the part of me that is the best. The part that you fall in love with is the essence of me, and vice versa. And when the, quote, honeymoon is over, then the personalities begin to close back down again, and those two people maybe don't even know each other, don't even know that part, and that's what you sort of have to get used to becoming introduced to over time, and maybe you don't like that person. So there has to be some way to continually, on a daily basis or a weekly basis or some kind of continual basis, to drop all of that, reconnect with the essence, to keep the love connection alive and conjoined. And this is a scientific way of doing that, the biotuning method of couples therapy. Now, so it's a way of linking two people together scientifically and dropping the barriers between them. This kind of information is the kind of information that I would teach at various conferences that I went to. This was one of the big conferences I was doing throughout the 90s, the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energy and Energy Medicine, the ICEM conference. And this conference was a fabulous experience of some of the top movers and shakers in energy medicine and subtle field energy medicine. There was a lot of high-quality scientists and people there. And there were a lot of people who did energy work. And it was a wonderful mix that was going on there. And at one of these conferences, I would give, sometimes I would be the keynote speaker, but whatever, after my initial presentation, which I would usually do with some kind of a PowerPoint and a sound example, I would also hold a workshop. And during the workshop, there was always an incredible number of people that came, beautiful people. At the conclusion of the workshop, in one of these, a bunch of us all went out to dinner afterwards. And during dinner, we're sitting around and kind of going, what's your name and what do you do? And that's where I met this one person here, Ivy Ross. So I asked, she and I were hitting it off really well together, and I was saying, what do you do? And she says, I'm the head of the Barbie division at Mattel. And I just had to laugh because, first of all, no human being on Earth looks like Barbie. But just the fact that I'm meeting the person in charge of Barbie at the girls' toys division of Mattel was a kick in the teeth. We had a good laugh about that. But, I mean, it's the head of the Barbie division at Mattel. What a riot. And as time went on, we became really good friends. We had a series of meetings. And at one of those meetings, she's saying, because I was talking about the ability to boost creativity and the flow state and meditation and relaxation and this and that, she got really interested in the creativity part, because creativity takes place in theta. And the moment a problem gets solved, the right-left hemispheres come together. And I was telling her that we now have the ability to call that up at will. In other words, I could take a person and I could expose them to a generic program of exercising theta brain function with headphones and a soundtrack and a sound chair and these light glasses I talked about before, which are driven by the sound. So the sound is making the lights flash against your closed eyes, and you're seeing all these incredible psychedelic mandala patterns, which are the visual component of what you're hearing and what you're feeling. So we're synchronizing up the three primary perceptual modes, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and we're doing it in theta with the hemispheres synchronized, which means we're putting you smack dab in the middle of where your brain goes when it's in its creative mode, in its problem-solving ability. So the idea that problem-solving and creativity is something we know what it looks like on EEG, and we can take that picture of EEG and reproduce it with brain entrainment and sound waves through headphones, means that we can train up your creativity and boost it. So she said, look, I want you to come to Mattel and do this for Mattel. So that was my first foray into doing corporate work with brain entrainment. And in this case, it had to do with boosting creativity and problem solving and lateral out-of-the-box thinking. The interesting thing is, of course, we did, I think we have 40 people in that group. This was the top designers for Barbie from Mattel. Everybody kind of had their own little cubicles in this vast space, and each person would work on one little area of Barbie. So one person would only do eyes, and one person would do hair, and one person would do painting things and clothing and box design, advertising, marketing. She took the top people from various of these departments and made them part of this group. And in that group, I created a generic series of soundtracks. There was 6 soundtracks that were an exercise program in theta. So each soundtrack took your brainwaves to a different part of the theta band zone and exercised that portion. So after you listen to all 6 of these over time, it would have been a complete program of exercising all functions of theta to make sure that we kind of hit everybody's personal zone. Plus, they did it on the sound chair with the light glasses, with headphones on. And because there was so many people, we could only do this for 20 minutes for each person 3 times a week. We did this program for 6 weeks. I hired an external company who does all kinds of different categories of scientific testing, before and after testing, and we chose a test for 5 levels of creativity, a paper test. So everybody in this program took this paper test. I sent it back off to this company. They independently scored it. So now we had a readout of each person in the group's personal creativity score of 5 levels of creativity, and then we could extrapolate that together into a score for the whole group as a whole. Then we did the 6-week program, and we did the test again, and we could prove that we could boost creativity in this group by 20% in 6 weeks. And without using it a lot, this was 20 minutes a day, 3 times a week per person for 6 weeks, boosted their creativity response by 20%. And Mattel won Innovative Toy Design of the Year that year. And there was another program that we did in between that, but which I'll explain in a minute. But the response was pretty mind-blowing. And when you win Innovative Toy Design of the Year, that means that your innovative new toy design, which was unique in the marketplace, hit the marketplace, which is what they were hiring me to do, is to come up with new toy designs to hit the marketplace, and those sales go sky high. And so your market share goes up and your stock market goes up and the whole business. And I'm thinking, how much was I charging for this? They made $400 million on the stock market. And but this translated to me to now be called by all kinds of different corporations to do similar programs. So I did Cisco, and Cisco was interesting because this group was a group of programmers troubleshooting code, which requires you to be highly creative and problem solving. And so we had before and after testing with this, and we could prove we could boost the creativity by 20% in this group, and also their ability as a company to solve problems and rewrite code in a better way creatively went through the roof. That brought us to Nike. So I did a similar program for Nike for new design of shoes and athletics and stuff like that. That brought me to Hilton Hotels and Procter & Gamble and Embassy Suites Hotels. I was on the creative staff of Embassy Suite Hotels. This just translated into all these different corporations, big corporations that I started doing this work with. And each one of those I could do this before and after testing, so I could objectively prove that we were showing results that ended up pushing something in the marketplace. Well, that said, let's teleport once again back into Mattel, where we did a phase 2 program with Mattel, where I hooked each person in the group to EEG and did some simple tests to find out where does your brain go when you're in your maximum creative mode, and made custom soundtracks for each person in that group. And then a couple of months later, Ivy calls me on the phone and she says, I want you to be part of yet one more group, one more a phase 3, so to speak. She said, I've talked the executive branch of my boss into doing a special project to see if that can work. And we're going to take everybody out of their little cubicles and we're going to put them in a separate building with no cubicles, no walls, everybody's desks are on wheels, and we're going to try to shake them all up and push the envelope of what creativity means in all kinds of different ways. And she said that she was calling this Project Platypus. Now, the reason she was calling it Project Platypus is because a platypus is the only mammal that lays an egg, and its beak looks a lot like its tail. So in a lot of cases, you can't tell which is the front end. But it's an oddball animal, and it's an oddball animal as the mascot for an oddball project, Project Platypus. So that was the idea. And the cool thing about Project Platypus was she had this, I think it was 20 people in this group. This group now would oversee a project from start to finish, and everybody would be involved with it. No more, I'm only doing eyes, or I'm only doing hair, or I'm only doing clothing, or I'm only doing box design and marketing. Everybody from start to finish, from the beginning of the project to the end, would be in the design of this toy and its packaging and its marketing and the whole business, start to finish, which in itself is good because it's kind of hard to only do one little thing, eyes, all the time, without seeing how this blossoms into a whole project. Meantime, she had a whole bunch of different interesting people come through. She had psychologists and play therapists, a Jungian psychologist. She had a shaman come do this group thing. She had a professional mime teach people how to do mime work. She had clowns and play therapists and all this troupe of people coming through to shake people up. She had somebody who came and taught them how to do origami, somebody who came in and showed them how to make paper airplanes, and on and on. And then, of course, there was me. And my job was to do this group mind link for team building. My job was to boost the group as a cohesive whole, to boost the group's creativity and problem solving and out of the box thinking. That was my job. And so when I went there, my job is to link everybody together so they work as a whole. And I took that idea from what I was doing with couples work, where you can cause a linking up of the different people's nervous systems and their brainwaves together, as in what I was doing with couples therapy by having them hold hands and splice in my little biotuning computer. And that's what I did with this whole group. And this was the first time I had ever done this. And even today, I can't believe I had the chutzpah to pull that off. I must admit I was a bit freaked out by the fact that I'm going to try to hook everybody in this group, 20 people instead of just 2, because I really didn't know if it was going to work or not. But technically and scientifically, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. So it was a good bet that it would be okay. But since I'd never done it before, and I'm doing it at Mattel at this special project, as my maiden voyage was, kind of scary. But what that looked like is we have these 20 people, and I'm telling everyone. So first of all, I give a big presentation on what I'm up to, what I'm doing, what this is all going to look like, and why we're doing it, and what the soundtracks are doing, and the brain entrainment, and all that stuff. And then I had everybody take their shoes off, shoes and socks off, and sit cross-legged on the floor in a circle, and scoot together until everybody's knees touched. So now everybody's sitting with their legs crossed, with bare feet. And when you get close enough to each other that your knees are touching, the bottoms of everybody's feet now touched. Dr. Thompson's mingling of the souls, so to speak. So now we've got everybody sitting in a circle with their knees touching and the bottoms of their bare feet touching. And now I'm going to have everybody cross their arms over and hold hands. So now we have a double braided electromagnetic field connection among everybody's bodies through skin conduction of their feet and their hands. And we already right now are creating a coupled oscillator biological synchronization network just from science, just from the science of coupled oscillators. I know that within 10 minutes, everybody's heart rate and respiration and pulse and brainwaves will begin to start to align together. And so I'm going to take this group, and I'm going to take 2 people in that group and split them apart so that their feet and their hands are not touching. And I'm going to splice in my laptop, my biotuning laptop. So I'm going to have one wrist sensor on this person's wrist and the other wrist sensor on the other person's wrist, so that the laptop is now spliced into this circle of holding hands. And I'm going to fire up my laptop, fire up the heart rate variability, and I'm going to get a readout like I got before of the sympathetic parasympathetic balance. And when that readout pops up, of course, we've got a huge sympathetic stress response that exists under the hood among all of these 20 strangers who are trying to learn how to play together as little kids. But we're all adults, so of course it's difficult to let go of all the stuff necessary to truly meet each other's essences in the field of play. But now we can do this scientifically, because I do my sound sweep, and as the sound waves get closer and closer to the frequency for this group entity that exists only when everybody in this group is together, as that sound sweep is rolling forward, we're watching the stress response collapsing and collapsing until it hits this 0 stress point for the group. And now I've got a frequency to use. And in this case, I could play this frequency for the group from my computer and stand in the center of this circle with my 3D microphones on and my little recorder, and guide the group into singing an Om chant in the key of the tone that drops the group's entity into a 0 stress response among everybody. And then I took that recording of the group voice singing its tone and split into various octaves and created a biotuning program for the group entity that everybody listened to for 20 minutes, 3 times a week, individually with headphones and light glasses and a sound chair, and started each day together, sitting in a circle holding hands, chanting along with the soundtrack I had recorded for the group. And that's how they began the day, each day, for the 5-minute circle, 5-minute chant to align everybody together, drop the barriers. And that's when Mattel won Innovative Toy Design of the Year. And their market share went up 5 or 10%, something like that on the stock market. They made hundreds of millions of dollars. And I made front page of the Wall Street Journal. Actually, it wasn't the front page. It was the inside business marketing page. New innovative stuff in business. And it was right on the top, above the fold, article about what Mattel had done with Project Platypus, with a special section, a special 3 paragraphs, all about the part that I did there. Because, of course, it was so weird. It's like, yeah, there was also this guy who did this crazy thing with people's voices and brain entrainment and sound chairs and before and after testing that could prove a 20% boost in creativity. So yeah, And so it's this work, which eventually led to Google, and that's because my friend Ivy Ross, who's the head of the Barbie division, who set this whole thing up with me, she didn't stay at Mattel forever. She went off and was part of the Gap and then part of Disney and a number of other big name companies until she finally landed a job at Google. And her job at Google was to save a program that was crashing and dying, and that was Google Glass. This Google Glass thing just couldn't get off the ground. Nobody was interested in it. It was intimidating to have some kind of... People were afraid that somebody is recording me without my knowledge, or it was just kind of weird. And so she was hired to resurrect it and save it, and she did. She realized, look, you're marketing to the wrong place. This, people in general don't want this. Who wants this is industry and medicine. And I mean, if you go to medical school, now we have students with Google glasses on so they can see an overlay of a body when they're doing dissection or they're doing a sham operation. It's a virtual reality thing. You can do this in industry where we now can see printed computer boards. So she made this into a multi-billion-dollar business by saving it and resurrecting it. And for doing that, she was catapulted to vice president of design for Google. My friend, as I said before, it's all just 1 degree of separation now, right? And at a certain point of a few years later, I mean, we kept up in touch. And when I found out that this had happened, I called her up and was congratulating her. And and then a bit later, she called me up and wanted me to consult with Google on some projects they were doing. So that how I kind of ended up doing Google as well. And now I'm bringing this back to where we are now, because the real underpinnings of the next evolutionary step of where these live stream mind links could go and will go at some point when this coronavirus thing is finally all over. We need to have the people be present physically with each other so that we can do the next step up of what I was doing at all these big companies, where we can physically be together with the soles of our feet touching and our hands holding hands in a circle, and have hundreds or maybe thousands of people doing this at the same time, and have the heart rate variability spliced in that has to go through every single person's body so we get a readout of the true group entity on my computer screen so that I can collapse the stress that will inevitably exist among strangers. Collapse the stress scientifically to a zero stress point. So all of our doors open up and that we all are in our essence connection with each other as a scientific measurable fact. Then we can find a single frequency for this group entity, and we can now nail very precisely scientifically where the magic door is and how to make it open for all of us to really get this work to the next stage. So the only thing that comes close to that is to do what we're doing now with a generic soundtrack where all of us are getting our brainwaves linked up together so we're synchronized up. And for today, I want to make that image be the image that I've described, where we imagine that we are in a circle with our feet touching and our hands holding And we have found this magic scientific frequency that very specifically opens the magic door for all of us, specifically, where we can commune together and form a symbiotic whole with the living planet that we're part of, and come up with an answer of how we make all of this change for the better. The change has already begun. As you can see where the world is now, things are going to start changing. We're just trying to push that for better and sooner and more profound. So my soundtrack for today, and let's have our headphones out. I'm also pushing the envelope of the concept of primordial sounds. We want to go to the most primordial places possible in the deep unconscious, collective unconscious. And the image for that has always been the ocean. And so there's going to be a lot of ocean sounds in 3D moving in this soundtrack. And this soundtrack was also taking digital recordings of whales. Whales and dolphins are the kings of the sea, and in this case it's whales. So I have whale songs digitized, looped, and spread across every key of my keyboard. And as you play successive keys, the computer will speed up or slow down the recording of the whale voice to the precise amount necessary to hit that next note. So I can play a whale symphony. I can play whales in harmony. I can play whales singing melodies. And that's what this soundtrack is all about. So pay attention that in the beginning, what you will hear is pure whale voices singing. And at the very end, the same thing. And as it progresses into the middle, the whale voices will start to sing these huge chords that sound like organs. And I have mixed in some other instrumentation sounds at the center part of this recording. But throughout the entire recording, what you are hearing is ocean and whale voices singing the whole composition. And it's an ode to planet Earth, which is basically a water planet. And we are water beings in physical spacesuits with ocean water inside so we can come on land. So, close your eyes and here we go. Here's the address where you can get the soundtrack. It's my great honor and joy to be here with you all. Thank you all for coming. Peace, joy, happiness, good health, good futures. Take care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you here next Sunday.